All right there, everyone. Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has angered the left-wing media by stating that Nazis were leftists. The one problem for all the leftist liberals in the media, he's right. That's what we'll be talking about on today's video. Warm welcome to all of our first-time viewers. I post 2 videos a day analyzing current events in line of conservative trends. So if you would, please smack that bell and subscribe button. It's an absolute privilege to have you as a regular part of our online community. All right, so the nationalist populist giant Jair Bolsonaro, the Trump of the tropics, as it were, has stirred controversy once again, which of course is the only reason nationalist populists exist for the left-wing globalist media. They exist only for the media to mock and berate and impugn and ridicule as knuckle-dragging racist Neanderthals, right? The occasion here centers on Bolsonaro's recent trip to Israel. He had just visited a Holocaust memorial. He was being interviewed by reporters who asked him about recent comments made by his foreign minister who claimed that the Nazis were leftists. And Bolsonaro said, yeah, he agreed with that completely. And of course, he cited the fact that the Nazis were a socialist party. And in Latin America, socialist means leftist, plain and simple. Now, it didn't take long before the corporatist globalist media, the legacy media, the left-wing activists who pose as pundits, reporters, and journalists, it didn't take long before you saw headlines like this from The Independent. Brazil's far-right President Bolsonaro falsely claims Nazism is a leftist movement. And then they cite the very museum that he had just visited that stated that Nazis were far-right movement. And that's all you needed to debunk a far-right radical like Bolsonaro. That's all the paper did. But Bolsonaro isn't alone. Jonah Goldberg of National Review wrote his book, Liberal Fascism. Dinesh D'Souza published a book called The Big Lie, exposing the Nazi roots of the American left. The economist Thomas Sowell has pointed out that the original fascists introduced in Italy by Benito Mussolini after the First World War, he noted that they were completely against individualism in general. They were especially against individualism in a free market economy. Their agenda included minimum wage laws, government restrictions on profit-making, progressive taxation of capital, and they promoted very rigidly secular schools. During the 1920s, liberal progressives in the United States and Britain recognized the kinship of their ideas with those of Mussolini, was widely lionized by the left. H.G. Wells, the British novelist, he called for a liberal fascism. And another literary giant, George Bernard Shaw, also expressed his admiration for Mussolini, as well as for Hitler and for Stalin. The racist element, as I understand it, didn't so much enter into the Italian and Spanish versions of fascism. It tended to be more specific to German Nazism. Regardless, during the 1920s and 1930s, it's well documented that fascism was not only looked on favorably by the left, but recognized as having kindred ideas and agendas and assumptions. This is well documented. And so the whole dismissal of Bolsonaro is just further evidence that the corporatist globalist media is not made up of journalists, but instead left-wing activists whose number one job is not to report news, but to concoct it, to fabricate it. Moreover, the eugenics ideology of Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, was inordinately influential on the Nazi outworking of fascism. Now, in fairness, fascism is, as I'm alluding to, it's a complicated ideology. It worked out very differently in Italy and in Germany, Franco's Spain. But there is something that I think needs to be said here in terms of how we're going to categorize it with regard to which position it gets in relation to the ideological aisle. One of the most important things to understand about fascism and the Nazis in particular, since that's what Bolsonaro was responding to, is that both were what we call modernist movements. It's very important, right? They were the outcome of a fundamental philosophical commitment known as modernity. And modernity, simply put, is a one-size-fits-all philosophical outlook that sees scientific rationalism as the one true way of understanding reality. Scientific rationalism trumps any and all other forms of knowledge as the one true way of understanding the world. And this Enlightenment-based epistemology gave birth to 3 major ideologies: globalism, communism, and fascism. You see, modernity sees all pre-modern societies, particularly those governed by religious commitments, as inherently irrational. and thus asserts itself as the one true political, economic, and cultural meaning system for all nations, for all peoples. And so in the 20th century, the West proclaimed liberal democracy, which eventually became globalization, as the ultimate political system. The Soviet East proclaimed communism as the ultimate economic system. And Italy and Germany were declaring fascism as the ultimate cultural meaning system. And I think this is very, very important for us to get. The Russian geopolitical philosopher Alexander Dugin points out that with the death of fascism and communism, the liberal democratic West declared itself to be the true modernist champion of all three systems, political, economic, and cultural. And of course, the chief export of this Western triumphalism has been what's commonly referred to today as globalization, which is simply a one-size-fits-all political and economic and increasingly cultural system that superimposes itself upon all cultures, customs, and traditions and changing them in accordance with its globalist norms and standards. So what we have to understand, and believe me, I know that the corporatist globalist media will never understand this, since they're left-wing zealots fully invested in discrediting all things nationalist, populist, and traditionalist. But what we have to understand is that this massive nationalist, populist, and traditionalist backlash that we're seeing today against globalization is in fact a backlash against modernity and modernity's offsprings, whether those offsprings are globalism or communism or, yes, fascism. And the political aisle of the left and the right have been redefined in terms of globalism versus nationalism, or secularism versus traditionalism, or elitism versus populism. There's virtually universal agreement that the nationalist, populist, traditionalist side is the right. Some would actually call it the far right by the very corporatist, globalist media that's mocking Bolsonaro right now. Well, then there's no way around this. If we on the nationalist, populist, traditionalist side are on the right, then they, the globalist, secular modernists, the one-size-fits-all modernists, are on the left. And so as it turns out, Jair Bolsonaro is absolutely right. To the extent that they were a thoroughly modernist movement, which virtually all scholars of fascism argue they were, then fascists fit most perfectly on the political left, right next to globalists. As always, please like, comment, and subscribe.
Subscribe to the channel and be a nice person, sir. Follow me on Twitter, okay? Have a bloody nice day over there with a quite nice weather. Bye.